Hello and welcome to the third episode of A History of Thrones, and in this episode we are going to be focused on Richard II, and I'm going to hope to demonstrate how he inspired the character Joffrey Baratheon in Game of Thrones. So Richard II lived from 1367 to 1400. He was known as Richard of Bordeaux because he was from Bordeaux, and he was the first English king where his court actually spoke English as its first language. So he became king even because his father died, Edward the Black Prince, and this itself was controversial because he wiped out an entire generation of legitimate adult male heirs just to crown Richard king. However, his uncle John of Gaunt did remain a strong influence on Richard, and was really quite loyal to his king, despite some temptation maybe to take the crown for himself. He never really did do that. What John would have done is try and convince Richard to break up the tight circle he had around him. Richard was not great with the other members of the aristocracy, particularly members of his own family. He tended to reward his favourites. For example, he made his former teacher, called Sir Simon de Burley, he made him a Knight of the Garter, which is like a real high honour, and it's not really, he didn't have any lands or titles, so it wasn't very a normal thing to do. However, I imagine those sort of conversations often went like this.
I am the king!
Richard was a big believer in the royal prerogative. He didn't think he needed to be dictated to by anyone, and would more likely remind everyone that he was the king, similar to Joffrey. However, when John of Gaunt was in Castile claiming the kingship there, as I talked about in the last episode, a plan was hatched between Henry of Bolingbroke, soon to be Henry IV, and Thomas, the Duke of Gloucester. So to put this in perspective, the two men leading the campaign to depose Richard were his cousin and his uncle. Not very nice. So them and a few other lords, called the Lords Appellant, put together a plan to force Richard to break up the tight circle around him and start rewarding the landed members of the aristocracy and not just people that he favoured. So what they did was, when he came back from Ireland, Richard's in Ireland, they managed to muster a force together of an army, confronted him and forced him to break up the tight circle around him. And a lot of his close friends and the tutor that I spoke of earlier, Sir Simon de Burley, were actually executed because of these demands, and Richard had little choice but to follow them. So as you see, the growing influence of Thomas of Gloucester in these years, although Gaunt still remained quite a strong member when he returned from France, he was never quite as disloyal to Richard as perhaps his brother was, or his uncle. However, when John of Gaunt died, this ushered in an era known as, by historians, as Richard's tyranny. He managed to accumulate a lot of power towards himself and over the next 10 years, and then he eventually had enough power to execute the Duke of Gloucester and banish Henry of Bolingbroke. Out of respect or love or whatever for John of Gaunt, he didn't actually disinherit him until John died. So when John of Gaunt died, he disinherited John's son, Henry. However, before that he didn't. Despite this, due to the political situation in France, Henry was given an army to go back to England and reconquer it, and he landed in Ravenspur, which is near Hull, and he managed to negotiate with the Earl of Northumberland and other lords to come and muster forces to him. And again, when Henry was in Ireland, I don't think he should ever have gone to Ireland if history's anything to go by, he managed to catch him off guard, and when he was marching through Wales near Flint Castle, Henry confronted him there and took the crown, and Richard surrendered his crown. And this is where we're going to pick up and focus on Joffrey. So what are the similarities between Joffrey and Richard? Well, if we're talking about positive things, both of them were very handsome, as you can see from Game of Thrones chapters. You know, even John admires Joffrey's good looks in the early stages, and historians do describe Richard as a most beautiful king. So yeah, I guess we can say they're both quite good looking guys, but let's remember how Joffrey ruled.
And the beast was every bit as fat as Robert was himself. But our brave king cried, do your worst, I'll have your ugly head. You're nowhere near as murderous as the lion in my bed. King Robert lost his battle and he failed his final test. The lion ripped his balls off and the boar did all the rest.
Very amusing. Isn't it a funny song? Thank you for your rendition. I imagine it was even better received at that tavern.
I'm so sorry, Your Grace. We'll never sing it again. I swear.
Tell me, which do you favor? Your fingers or your tongue?
Your Grace?
Fingers or your tongue? If you got to keep one, which would it be? Oh, I could just cut your throat.
Every man needs hands, Your Grace.
Good. Tongue it is.
Your Grace, please. I won't. Your Grace.
Sir Ilan, who better than you to carry out the sentence?
I beg you, please. Your Grace, please. I beg you, I'll never sing again.
I'm done for the day. I'll leave the rest of the matters to you, Mother.
Your Grace, please.
Yeah, so that was how Joffrey ruled. He was a bit of a bastard, and Richard II was very similar. Certainly in Shakespeare's depictions of Richard, it pictures him as almost insane, and he pretty much was really insane. I mean, a lot of contemporary historians record Richard as, you know, losing his grip on reality, and towards the end being completely mad. And they also share something else in how they went out.
Wait here.
Your Grace.
It's nothing.
He's choking!
Help the poor boy! Idiots, help your king!
Wait! Joffrey! Come with me now.
Yeah, as well as Joffrey, Richard II was rumoured to have been poisoned. Some historians say he died of starvation in his cell, but the circumstances around his death are mysterious, because having a king that had ruled living, he sort of like left opportunities for other rebellions. And when Henry discovered a plot to reinstate Richard while he was in prison by nobles of the English aristocracy, after that Richard didn't last long, and some people say he starved to death, some people say he was poisoned, some people say it was food poisoning, but the result of it was he did not survive long after the potential threat he posed was revealed. So that's it for this week, but next week I'm going to be examining Elizabeth Woodville, who was Edward IV's wife, and some of the impact she's had on our favourite female characters in Game of Thrones. Cheers.